about is we're going to spend the majority of our time today talking about what we call competency types, and I'll explain that more in here in a little bit. But the reason I'm taking this approach is because I know that you are all very qualified, intelligent individuals, right? Like, you wouldn't be here if you weren't. So you all have the capacity to go Google time management tips, and you'd find them, and they would be the same things I would tell you. So what I really want to focus on today is really digging into why am I not using those strategies? I know these things that will help me. I know that there's certain tips and techniques that would be helpful. What keeps me from putting them into place? So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is understanding that why rather than the what. I see some head nods. Thank you very much. I'll still tell you the what. I'll tell you some strategies for improving time management, but for me the why is much more important. Let's go back. So like I said, we're going to learn some strategies, but then throughout this you're going to notice me talking a lot about self-care. And that's because self-care really is very important when we talk about effective time management strategies, especially when you're moving into fields that most of you are going into. Because these are high-demand fields, and so if you don't take care of yourself, you are bumping up against burnout. And when people hit burnout, then time management goes out the window. So we really want you to avoid that rather than have to kind of recover from it and develop strategies after that's already happened. Okay, so let's talk about the first subtype, the perfectionist, right? So Dr. Young talks about the perfectionist as someone who feels like they have to get things right 100% of the time. 100% right 100% of the time, right? How many people in this room have fallen victim to that? You get caught up like, this has to be right, I have to do this right. Now, how many people have been given the message in your program or whatever that things have to be perfect? Well, that's good. Okay, I'm glad to see that, because I know people have gotten that message. There have been messages, especially as people are going into health sciences, right? Like, well, you can't mess up on this. You can't mess up on anything, right? But the problem is, once we start pushing towards perfection too far, we can sort of lose the forest for the trees. So yes, absolutely, we get stuck up on the details. When you spend too much time thinking about the little things, you lose the big picture. So let's talk about, when we talk about the perfectionists, right? Perfectionists get focused on the details, so you can be called a micromanager, right? People get a little bit annoyed that you're always focused on the details. You can have a hard time delegating to other people because nobody does things quite right for you. And a problem for a lot of the perfectionists is if they miss one thing, then they start this negative self-talk of like, well, I'm just not cut out to do this. I just can't, which can be defeating. And once you get into that just can't mode, it's really hard to get moving, right? Which can waste a lot of time while you're sitting there beating yourself up. So what do we do about that? Well, one of the important things, if you find yourself relating to this perfectionist subtype, is recognizing your own achievements. As human beings, we have a negativity bias. We focus on the negative more than we focus on the positive. Evolutionarily speaking, that was super helpful. It is not super helpful for us getting schoolwork done, right? It's not helpful for us getting work done in the lab or at work. What we really want to do is have a balanced view. The problem with the perfectionists is they tend to overweigh the negative and underweigh the positive. And we can talk about this from like a data standpoint. If you had a system that was bringing in data, but it only looked at negative data and discounted the positive data, you wouldn't have an accurate readout. You would not be able to make an accurate assessment of a situation. And that's what happens for perfectionists a lot, is they make inaccurate assessments of themselves and their capacity and what's necessary to do next, right? Which is then what leads you to mismanaging your time. I gotta get this one little detail right. I gotta focus on this. This has to be absolutely right. And you're losing the big picture back here, and time is just flying by. And the next thing you know, it's 3 a.m. and you're not getting any sleep. So it's important to recognize what is good enough. And a lot of perfectionists don't trust themselves in saying like, okay, I gotta recognize this is good enough, right? That when I need to do a task, I just need to do the task in order to move on to the next task, and then move on to the next task after that. Now, if I was giving this talk, I'm going to be disparaging towards undergrads for just a second, but if I was giving this talk to a group of freshmen, this might not make as much of an impact, because there might be people in the audience who would be more akin to doing that, like, well, you know, C's get degrees sort of thing, right? My assumption is that the people in this room, that doesn't resonate with you quite as strongly. Am I reading that right? Okay, cool. Yeah. So really what you need to be working on is, if you find yourself identifying with the perfectionist subtype and you notice you're wasting a lot of time focusing on these small details, start asking yourself, is this truly good enough? Can I move on to the next task so I can get more things done? And then recognizing that mistakes are part of the process, right? In order to learn and grow, you're in school for a reason. If you knew everything, you wouldn't be here. So you can't be perfect and be in school at the same time. It's just an impossibility. You wouldn't have to be here if you were perfect. So you're going to make mistakes. You are going to be imperfect, and that is part of the process. The whole point of you being here is to grow and be better. All right, let's move on to the next one. So the superhero. How many people identified with the superhero subtype? Yeah, okay. So the first thing that I really want to acknowledge with the superhero often takes on multiple roles, and there's this fear that if they fail at any one role, they'll be called out as a phony, right? You need to be an excellent student, you need to be an excellent daughter or son, you need to be an excellent partner, you need to be an excellent volleyball player, or whatever it is, right? Every role you take on, you need to be excellent at. I do also want to acknowledge that this subtype probably ends up impacting a lot of our marginalized students a lot more, because there's a lot more messages, like genuine messages, that if you come from a marginalized background, you really do have to take on multiple roles. It can look different when you come from a background that may not be privileged in certain ways, right? You may be told you have to be a perfect daughter and a perfect student at the same time. You may be told you've got to be able to, you know, move from this situation to that situation effortlessly. And so that's very real. So again, like I said before, this is all of this is on a spectrum, right? And we all take on multiple roles. So what we're really looking for when we're talking about time management is, when we relate to this superhero subtype, are we doing it in a way that ends up impacting our ability to efficiently engage in as many roles as we're capable of? So superhero subtypes tend to, you know, identify with a lot of this like overwork sort of stuff, right? I'm just going to put in that extra effort because I have to. Because I have to put on, you know, take on all these different roles. So they end up staying later than their peers to do things. They end up working in ways that end up leading to stressful, wasteful sort of like uses of time. And they often end up sacrificing themselves for other roles. And that's the one I really want to focus on. Because self-care is an important thing. And for many people who identify with the superhero subtype, they end up putting themselves last. Yeah, that is exactly right. You run up against burnout. You cannot do everything at all times for all people. And once you take on too many roles for too long, you're inevitably going to get burnout. And what we know is it's more damaging to try and recover from burnout than it is to just prevent burnout in the first place. Think about a vehicle where the engine completely runs out of gas. It's much harder to get it up and going again than it is when you just keep filling up the tank. That's much more damaging to the engine. So, one of the things that happens for people who take on this like superhero subtype is, because they don't have confidence in themselves, or that like core sense of self, they're kind of fractured amongst all these roles, they often respond most to external validation, from hearing from somebody else, oh, you did a really good job, this was really good. And again, nothing wrong with external validation. I think it's wonderful. I encourage more people to do it. But when that's your only source of like sense of self, it can really like impact how you manage your time, because you end up like seeking out that validation. Oh, I'm just going to work on this project too because I want that person to be happy with me. I'm going to work on this project too because I want that person to be happy with me. And so one of the things we talk about is, if you really want to manage this and improve time management based on this subtype, working on a secure sense of self, working on reminding yourself like, hey, I did a good job on this. This was a goal that I wanted to work towards and I accomplished it, good job me, can be really effective, because what that means is that you're in charge of deciding when you're gonna step off from that task and move to a new task. If you're always waiting for the other person to validate you, you're waiting on their time for them to decide it's okay to tell you you did a good job and you can move on. Another thing that can happen for the superhero subtypes, because they are so attached to making sure that other people recognize their strength and doing well for other people, they can take criticism really personally. And so part of, if you resonate with this a little bit, you might want to ask yourself, how do I take criticism? Like if somebody tries to give me constructive criticism, does it crush me? Does it make me feel like I'm just no good, right? And if that's the case, again, if I'm framing this as time management, what we want to do is, instead of taking it personally, which can completely shut us down. How many people have had that? You got criticized and then you just couldn't do anything for the rest of the day. You're like, I'm out of here, right? So it may seem counterintuitive, but working on taking criticism better is actually a time management strategy, because what you can hear when you stop taking constructive criticism personally, what you hear is actually strategies for improvement. You may be getting feedback that could help you do something better, faster, more efficiently, and that will save you time. Big one. It's okay to say no. How many of us in this room have a hard time saying no? Oh yeah, me too. I'm not saying that's the reason I'm doing this presentation. No, I actually really love doing these outreaches. No, it is really okay to say no. With We're the Superhero subtype, we often end up taking, it's really hard for us to say no to other people because we do want to take on everything and we believe that we can. In that moment, you're like, yeah, that's a really cool project, or yeah, I really want to do this, or yeah. But being able to recognize, like, what is my actual capacity? Which roles do I want to prioritize right now, right? Like right now, student may be the most important role in your life, and so you may have to take a step back from other obligations or requests that like lead into other roles in your life. Or vice versa. You might notice that you're taking on this student role so hard that you're like leaving all these other important roles in your life behind. And so you may have to learn how to say no to some of the student role stuff so that you can step into that personal life, personal self-care stuff. All right, my last one. I'm going to get on my soapbox for a second. The ethics of self-care. This is important for every subtype in this room, but I think it's especially important for the superheroes. Most people in this field, again, I know I'm generalizing, you've pursued this career because you care and you want to help, to make a difference in some way, right? And oftentimes, especially when we're in direct service, we kind of like give all of ourselves to the service that we're giving. The problem is that if we don't learn to value our role for ourselves, taking care of ourselves, we can burn out. We can end up being inefficient caregivers. The problem with that, not only is that that's hard for you and it's bad for time management, is that it's just basic unethical care. What we know is that care providers who engage in self-care are much more likely to commit medical errors and are much less likely to have malpractice suits brought against them. So if you are in that internal argument with yourself of like, do I really have time to take care of myself right now? And you can come back to yourself and say like, look, if I take care of myself right now, I will be better equipped to go to school tomorrow, to do the things that I need to do, to learn the things that I need to learn, and to be able to be a better care provider in whatever capacity that might mean for you. And finally, I think it's an important thing, again, for all time management strategies, but check yourself, ask yourself this question. Am I aiming for quality or quantity right now? For many superhero people, and actually for many of these subtypes, quantity gets emphasized, right? I need to do as much as possible. I need to get all the things done. But what that ends up meaning is that all the things get done poorly. All the roles get played out poorly. And so if you really focus on quality, right? What do I have the energy for right now? How can I engage in this role in a high quality way? Maybe you actually get that stuff done a little bit better. And where I see this most in my work is actually sleep. I can't tell you how many students come into my office and we start having a conversation and they're struggling, right? And then it just boils down to, oh yeah, and I didn't sleep. I've been, you know, like cutting it down to maybe like 4 hours a night. And I'm like, all right, well first let's do a little neuroscience and I can tell you about why that damages your ability to be a good student. But also, it sets up a bad pattern of just not taking care of yourself, right? And when you do that, when you say, okay, I'm gonna stay up until 3 a.m. and read like 6 more chapters or like slides or whatever, what's happening is it's just bad quality. You're not actually learning anything at that point. So asking yourself in that moment, am I spending time in a way that isn't quality time, right? If I went to sleep right now and woke up and was able to efficiently read through these slides, would that be a better use of my time than forcing myself to stay up for another hour and a half when I know I'm not gonna read anything, I'm like not gonna remember any of this, right? So part of it is just giving yourself permission to do that. All right, I'm trying to get through all of these. So, next one is the natural genius. Now, this is one I see a lot, and again, talk about the spectrum thing. Being a natural genius is not a bad thing. The way Dr. Young frames this, though, is that for many people, there is a sense that if something doesn't come easily to me or I don't get it on the first try, that means I'm a failure. Now, for many of our professional students, right, there is this just natural genius quality. What it means is you're just naturally good at certain things. Maybe you excelled in undergrad, or maybe you were just told growing up, like, hey, you're really good at this, right? But you get up maybe into a higher level of schooling, and all of a sudden you start facing challenges that you hadn't really had to face before. And when you're not able to meet those goals, or you struggle a little bit, all of a sudden you start relating that to your self-worth, right? So what ends up happening from a psychological perspective is that if people are given the message over and over and over again of like, oh, good job, you're the smart one. You did well in school because you're just so smart. Then what that equates to is a sense of self rather than a sense of effort. You don't get the message of like, you did good because you studied and you set your time aside and you managed things efficiently and now you got the grade that you wanted, right? You get the message of like, you did good just because you are good. Which that means when you do get that message, when things challenge you, then you can translate that to like, well, if I did good because I am good, well then if I do bad, that means I am bad. And that can really like shut us down. So, again, the questions that came up that reflect that is, you know, like everything I was just saying. You were able to do things without much effort, right? You find that things just naturally came easy to you. But when there's a setback, there's a sense of shame in that. Like, oh, well, maybe it's something wrong with me. You know, the thing I see the most with our natural geniuses is procrastination. And I see it for 2 reasons. All right, good. That one hit a nerve, right? Here's the rationale behind that, right? I mean, we all procrastinate to some extent. But when we talk about this competency type of natural geniuses, those of us who are naturally good at things, we can put things off for one of 2 reasons. One is, things have just come easy. So we feel sort of confident that, hey, you know what? I don't need to work on that. I'll get it done I'll figure it out. It'll be fine. I'll figure it out, right? So there's that procrastination in that sort of sense of like, I'll get it done because I always pull it out. And oftentimes that can be attached to a sense of thrill that happens when we procrastinate, and then you pull it out last minute and you're like, yeah, see, I got that. Not a super great strategy, because eventually it's going to come back at you. But the other thing that can happen, people don't often realize that, is what's underlying that is actually a sense of fear, right? If I get working on this and I don't do a good job, and maybe I am not really the genius that I think I am, maybe I'm not really as good as people think I am. And here's the thing, natural geniuses don't think of themselves as geniuses. We're talking about imposter syndrome here, right? So for most people that fall in this category, what's really happening inside is like, yeah, I keep pulling things off, but people don't realize that inside my head, I don't believe I know what's going on. Like, I'm just like pulling this off by the skin of my teeth, I'm making it up, I'm just pulling out of nowhere. And so for a lot of people, they're not thinking like, I'm a natural genius. They're thinking like, I don't really know how to do this, which leads to a sense of fear, which can freeze us up, right? If I don't know if I can do it, you know what, maybe I'll go wash the dishes instead. Or, you know, I think I need to organize my sock drawer right now. That's really what needs to happen instead of writing that paper. And so if we can challenge that just a little bit, right, that can really help us manage our time a little better. It can help us kind of start moving forward. And so one of the strategies for managing procrastination is just recognizing small successive steps, right? I don't need to write the whole paper right now. I just need to open my computer and that's it. That's all I'm gonna do, right? Or maybe I'm just gonna read one article tonight. I know I told myself that I need to read like 6 of them. I'm just gonna start with 1, that's it. So small successive steps are the keys to breaking out of procrastination. Also chunking those steps. You know what? I'm gonna tell myself I'm gonna set a timer, I'm gonna work for 20 minutes. When that timer goes off, I will give myself 5 minutes of rest and break and I'll go able to, you know, do whatever I'm gonna do for that 5 minutes. So if we can chunk that time, it can also help us bump out of that procrastination piece. Also notice when if you notice like, hey, I felt like I was a failure because I didn't get it 100% right, I felt challenged. Just come back to that self-compassion piece, right? It's okay, you are not supposed to succeed 100% of the time. You're supposed to fail a little bit at this, right? That's the learning process. So again, giving yourself that message that it's okay to struggle a little bit. All right. So the soloist, right? Our soloists. The soloist is a person who kind of believes they need to do it on their own. Not because they have such an exaggerated sense of self, but oftentimes the soloist is attached to this idea that if an achievement happens and I'm not the one who is fully responsible for that, then it's not really my achievement. And people are gonna realize that I'm not really cut out for this, that I need to rely on other people. Oftentimes soloists have been given the message of like, you gotta do it on your own. Well, just figure it out. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, all of that. And so again, not a bad thing. Like I said before, all of this is on a spectrum. It's not bad to be independent or be able to work on your own, but it can be damaging to our ability to work effectively if we're always the only one doing that work. So yeah, soloists are often like attached to this idea of, I don't need anybody's help. I gotta do this on my own. Yeah, problem is, that's not the way the world works. I know my art intern who put this together put that phrase up there. I was like, I'm gonna say teamwork makes the dream work. So I'm gonna say it, teamwork makes the dream work, right? But really it does. And I mean, okay, so I've made the assumption most people are going somewhere in the healthcare fields. Is that fairly accurate for most people in this room? Okay. So the thing that's really important to me, and you've probably been given this message often, is that you're moving into a field where you are going to have to work as part of a team, right? And for many of us, especially if you're pursuing an advanced degree, you may be in a place where you are supposed to be in a leadership role in that team, correct? So if you take on this soloist role, you're actually losing a lot of resources that are available to you. Now think about it, like I'll frame it in the medical framework, right? Say you're a physician, right? And you're working with a team of nurses and techs and everybody else. If you take on all the tasks and you're like, no, I'll just do that. No, I'll just do that. No, I'll just do that. You're doing like 6 people's work instead of just the one part of work that you're supposed to be doing, which makes you inefficient at the work that you need to do. Now, I know that's kind of a broad example and that's far out there and might be in the future for people, but the same thing can happen in the work that you're doing now. Each one of us probably has moments where you have to engage in some sort of teamwork, whether it's academically, because I know a lot of y'all get put in team stuff. How many people get that in their programs? Yeah. How many people are sick of the teamwork that they have to do in their programs? Y'all have to do a lot of teamwork in your program. Yeah. I know that. But it's an opportunity for you to really like check this part, right? Like, are there times where I don't want to work in a team, not because it's just genuinely annoying to have to work in a team, but because there's a little bit of imposter syndrome coming up, right? Are there times where I'm pushing back against this teamwork because there's a fear that if I don't do this, nobody's gonna do this, right? Like, I gotta finish this. If I don't do this project, like, I can't count on other people to like get the A for me, so I gotta get the A for me. So what I encourage in that sense is take a step back and step into your logical brain, right? Recognize that you have personal strengths and that other people in your life have personal strengths too. You have a support system, and people within your support system, whether it's team members in that academic program or whatever, or it's family members, or it's your social support, whoever they are, they have their own personal strengths. And if you can kind of catalog that and be like, okay, I'm gonna go to this person when I need emotional support. I'm gonna go to this person when I need, like academic support. Then it is using the most efficient use of the resources available. Because really what we want you to do is just cut down the amount of time spent. If you're struggling, say, in anatomy, and you really need to get that A, you could spend 16 hours in the lab studying by yourself, or you could reach out to that friend or that tutor or whoever else knows it a little bit better and maybe cut that time in half. Because they've already made those mistakes. They've already figured it out. So use those skills. Kind of selfishly, honestly, you don't want to waste your time reinventing the wheel where you don't have to. The other thing too, for a lot of people who are soloists, they can feel really insecure about expressing their own needs. Like, I need a little bit of help. Because they're afraid, whether they're expressed or not, that by expressing those needs, it's going to be perceived as being vulnerable. On a lot of these high-pressure programs I know you're in, there is some risk to being vulnerable, or there's some perceived risk to being vulnerable. However, what I have found is for most people who take that risk, and they're able to find safe people to be vulnerable with, it actually pays off in the long run, right? If you express a need of like, hey, I need a little bit of help in the anatomy lab, then it actually pays off because people see you as a real human being instead of some sort of like robot who can do all the things without needing any help from anybody else. And then also, when you do collaborate, take a moment. Again, I keep coming back to like self-compassion piece. Take a moment to celebrate your successes. Hey, I did it. I found out who my team was. I used them, did a good job, we succeeded. All right, and then our last one, the expert. Yeah, we can often fall into this one, right? Because the expert is not actually an expert. It's like the genius, right? If you call the expert an expert, they would be like, oh, no, don't give me that label. I am not an expert. What the expert's referring to in Dr. Young's work is that these are people who kind of like the perfectionist, where the perfectionist feels like it has to be done 100% of the time. For the expert, there's a feeling that I have to know all the things before I'm good enough. And so experts are often find themselves like constantly seeking out new information, constantly like, well, I'm just gonna read like 2 more articles before I start writing this paper. I'm just gonna just take 1 more class before I like move on and like apply for that extra fellowship or whatever it is. So the questions that were associated with that, experts tend to shy away from taking jobs or opportunities, right? I gotta be 100% there before I can take that job. Constantly seeking out that extra information. So here are some things to keep in mind, right? And ramification is, the truth of the matter is there's always more to learn. Thank goodness, right? Like if you hit the end of learning, how boring would that be? There's always going to be something else you can learn and do. And I hope that you have a passion for that. Again, spectrum thing. Seeking out new knowledge, not a bad thing. Seeking out new knowledge because you're afraid to move, that might be a bad thing. And recognize that you have all things to offer, even if you're not 100% yet, right? You don't actually have to be the expert before you can contribute. So part of challenging that is recognizing like, hey, am I delaying right now? Am I not doing the tasks that I need to because I feel like I need more information? All right, can I just get started? Can I just like name what I can contribute to this and get going and start putting that stuff out there? And another big thing is be willing to be wrong. again, I know I keep coming back to this, and I've got this message that you're hearing the whole time, the self-compassion thing, right? It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to make mistakes. You are in school for a reason. You're not going to be right all of the time. I like this one because when I do talks like this, this is the one that I'm often thinking of when the room is silently staring at me when I'm asking questions, right? You're like, hey, give me an idea. You guys have been great today, by the way, thank you. This is why I bring swag to give out, is because most of the time I have to like really pull to get people to respond. But I think for many people, they're silent in the room because there is this expert piece that's coming in, right? It's like, I don't really know the answers, so I'm just not gonna say anything. And so I'm encouraging you, take the chance, be wrong, speak up a little bit. And again, I know the culture of the programs that you're in, that a lot of times that there's a negative feel against that, maybe not necessarily from the administration, but from peer groups often. There's a feeling of like, yeah, people may get ridiculed if they say the wrong thing. But that's where that building up that sense of self comes in, of like, you know what, I can be wrong and that can be okay because I'm here for a reason, I'm paying for this education, and the best way to learn is to make a mistake and learn from that mistake. All right, so we got through all of them and we are almost out of time. So we got about 5 minutes, just a couple of slides left. One thing I'm gonna put up here is just general time management strategies. This is the stuff that I said you could Google. So there's a lot on there. Some of them I've already talked about, like it's okay to say no. Figuring out what works best for you. You have to know yourself. Part of time management is tuning into yourself and trusting yourself. You could sit down with me one-on-one, we'd have a long conversation about what gets in the way of you managing your time, but the truth of the matter is for most of you, you already know that, right? You kind of know yourself, you know where you bump into things, and so trusting that, figuring it out, like, you know what? I know everybody else seems to be studying at lunchtime, but that doesn't work for me. I'm gonna go sit outside in the sun and eat my lunch instead. The other thing too is sometimes it can be really helpful to track your energy across the day. Just even like taking a notebook out and like checking in every hour for yourself, high energy, low energy, higher energy, low energy, right? And once you get a sense of when your best energy times are in the day, being good about prioritizing those like hard tasks, those challenging tasks in those times can be really helpful. A lot of us push tasks back to times where we're the least efficient, where we're going to like, you know, it's midnight, you're exhausted, your brain's not working anymore, and now all of a sudden you're taking on that big project that's due in 2 days. You've heard me say over and over self-care and compassion. Clearly I have a bias towards that, right? But again, I hope that I've been able to communicate to you why that's important for time management strategies. If you don't take care of yourself, you burn out, you're not gonna be able to get your work done. And then one of them, using technology to your advantage. Again, Rachel, who's put together part of this presentation for me, did some great research on apps that are available. We're gonna have this slide posted, right? Okay, so there's links in these slides to those various apps. There's a million of them out there. Again, you've got the capacity to search things out. But finding some technological resources can be really helpful. So some of these resources are things like the Self-Control app that's on Mac. That's where you set limits on like, I can't look at this particular website. So say you want to block yourself from Reddit for a particular amount of time, that app can do that so you don't find yourself like going down the Reddit rabbit hole. Other things like Focus Booster, Forest, stuff like that, just gives you reinforcement for like, hey, you actually paid attention, you did the thing that you wanted to do at this time. And then there's a billion to-do list apps out there, but they can be really helpful. Just taking like calendars, like electronic calendars, stuff like that. We all know that they work for ourselves, but part of it is just convincing ourselves like, hey, I know these strategies work, I'm actually committing to using it this time. Now for those perfectionists in the room, what ends up happening is you try it once, you don't fill out your calendar one time, and you're like, see, I'm a failure, I can't use a calendar, I'm never gonna do it again. So allow yourself to be imperfect in using these strategies, and they will help you a lot more. All right, we have a few minutes left. And again, we talked about self-care and compassion, but we'll just move it into the questions section. Any things that I can offer, any questions that have come up, anything we didn't hit in the like 50 minutes that we've been talking?